Okay, man, I'll show you the really basic stuff in Modo so you can get up to speed on that. I'll just show the interface quickly and then we'll go a bit deeper on that. So the interface basically is just divided in a few different areas. First one that you have to look at is this on the left side is your tools. So your tools palette, you have different sort of tools that are separated with tabs depending on the workflow and depending on the type of action you want to do. So, and this part is divided into two different parts. So you have your tools here. Like I said, when you activate one of them, you'll have a little options of the tool that will appear on the down below. So depending on the tool, you have different properties, and you'll see them appear in the bottom once you select it, and you have this little orange background when it's selected. So for example, we'll just select some polygons and do move. Then you can either use the viewport to then do your work and move things around, for example, or you could also, when you need more precision, for example, you have an actual numerical little tab here. So that's pretty useful sometimes, because you want, if you want something a certain dimension, for example, you could use that and type it in, and it has different properties depending on the tool, but we can look at that later. So I'm going to deselect. Then you have this top little tab menu. Depending on the workflow that you use, you can see it's written on it: paint, topology, UV mapping, layout, all that stuff. Mainly you're going to use the model tab with all your tools set in a certain way. So depending, look at, like, it changes the arrangement of the tools of the windows depending on the workflow, and that's like a basic thing that they did to kind of make things easier. But you'll mostly use the render tab and the model tab, so let's just keep that in mind for now. It's not too important. Then we have the viewport, which is this central area where you have these little buttons on top, and then the actual viewport where you do your 3D work. So these things are super cool. It's basically different selection sets. So you have, depending on what you want to do, let's say I want to move just one vertex, I'll click here and it will select vertices, and then I can individually move them around. If you want to work on edges, you go edges, and then you'll be able to select actual edges. Polygons, same thing. Materials, well, I don't have materials right now, I have only one. But then, and items is different meshes. If you have, I'll just make a new mesh just for you to see. Just drop a cube in it, and now I have two items, and if I select item selection set, I'll be able to just click on each and have easier selections like that. So I'll delete that. Oops, that's the one I'll delete. And then you have this part on the right, which is mainly going to be used for your item list and properties. And properties, you'll see, if I select this mesh, this object, this item in here, I'll have its properties down below. So really useful stuff. You'll see more once we start doing actual work. But just so you have a better idea of the actual layout, it's quite simple, and at the same time there's a lot of stuff. So yeah, I prefer to kind of start like that, just show you each little thing. Okay, now let me show you the the basic like how to move around the viewport now. If you have these icons here that you can use, obviously you'll use the shortcuts for that, because that's pretty hard to all the time go back. So if you maintain Alt and click, you'll orbit around. If you do Alt and Shift and click, you'll do the panning. So orbiting with Alt, Shift, panning, Alt Control is zooming, or you can zoom also with the mouse wheel. That's the basic navigation in Modo. And also something really important that is really annoying in the beginning. Sometimes you move around and you just do something somewhere and then you lose. You don't know exactly where the object is. And if you have an object selected, you can do Shift A to put it back into your center view. So sometimes you get lost, and just use that Shift A. It will focus on that part. If you select something, it's the same. If you can select a few different edges, and you're in a really complicated model, sometimes you really have to get inside and stuff, and that's really useful to get your bearings. Sometimes Shift and A, and it will autofocus. Alright, now I'm going to go back into each of these sections of the interface and show you a little bit more, so you have a better understanding. So in here, let's look at these first. The cube one, the same thing for the sphere or cylinder, is the basic mesh import. You can draw a little square and make it into a cube. And the direction is actually something that's important in Modo. The direction of your action, of whatever you do, like most tools will actually behave in that way, is that you can see the white grid in the background, and if I move around, the white grid kind of follows my perspective. So it's kind of a helper to determine where you're going to put your action, basically. So if I want to draw, so I'll use a cylinder just to show you. This part is drawn on this axis because of the white grid, the work plane we call it. You can see it here. There's some options, and then for more advanced stuff we can see later. It's not too important now, but keep that in mind. Like if you want to draw that cylinder in a certain orientation, just look at the white grid, the work plane. It's going to show you where to put your first stroke. We'll apply that onto that axis. So then the basic mesh edit kind of things, I take this one and I want to just make it bigger. Also, if you don't select anything and you use the scale tool, for example, it will not like that. It will scale everything. And if you select something, then it will apply on that selection. So you don't have to select everything to then apply something on the whole mesh. Well, like I said earlier, move tool, basic stuff, so you can, it's self-explanatory pretty much. But then you have more complicated sort of tools that you'll definitely use a lot. Let's look at this one, deform. There's not much that I use in this one. I use a lot in the duplicate. So for example, there's a shape that I want to replicate and make into like a few clones. I'll use, for example, this one. The clone tool will do a linear cloning, and you can add, and like I said earlier, you'll see this tool summons up this little properties tab where you can actually change the properties of what you're doing right now. So I want to clone something, I want to make it like a grid. I can just augment the number of clones like this just by clicking, or you could just type it in. And it also has all the options that will allow you to control how you apply that. So you could do it in the viewport by just moving things around like this, for example, or you could just type it in, and sometimes it's more precise like that. Or you have things like some more maybe actual modeling tools, like you could slice your mesh like this, for example, and you have then the ability to It work that way, for example. Or bevel tool is something that I use all the time. Have it on the B shortcut. If you click, it will activate the tool. So let me show you again. You just do your selection of what you wanna apply your action to. Let's say I want to bevel this little polygon. Click bevel, and right now it's not really activated. You have to click in the viewport, and you'll see the tool handles pop up. And on this tool, you have two different parameters that you can really change. So there's the shift. It's this blue arrow. You can shift this geometry of a certain amount of the direction, and then you have the inset, which will allow you to make it smaller or bigger like that. So you could use it to create things like this. What I'm doing now is shift clicking to reapply the tool. Shift click, get bigger, shift click, and move it, because if I keep just moving, it's just applied once, but you can apply multiple times by doing shift and click. It's easier than just reselect and then re-click and then do this all the time. That's a super useful one. So I think that's pretty much, you'll have to just mess with it and just have fun looking around, looking at what they do, but that can also help you later on that. We could look at, what could we look at next? Yeah, let's do selections, and I'll use this one as an example. Just delete everything. So just to show you, because that's a good point. So selecting, you can select the vertices this way. So you can delete, for example. You can select edges, like I said. If you double click one edge, it will follow it and try to find the loop. So that's pretty useful. Sometimes you want to have a selection of the loop to then apply. For example, I can apply a bevel on this whole loop, so I'll click B, click, and then drag this this handle. And in here, like we said earlier, we have the properties. So the beveling an edge like this will give you this curving effect, and you'll add geometry basically around this edge. So if you do, let's do it at 0, it's the minimum. You can do this and then make it rounder by adding more edges. It's just really useful when you want to do some more intricate geometry. But yeah, selection. So it's like in Photoshop that you can paint your selection, and like I'm clicking only once and holding, and I just select all of this, which is pretty basic. With the left click, and then you have the right click, which will bring up the lasso, and there's a few different types. So lasso style, you have lasso, rectangle, circle. I'll do rectangle as the basic one, and you do a selection like this. And if you notice, if I select all of this here, we'll only select the front of the object that I'm looking at, and it doesn't select the background. Sometimes you want to select the edges or the polygons that are in the background, so you'll use the middle mouse to do that, and it will select all of it. For example, here I'm selecting this. It's okay, it doesn't select the back. If I do this with the right click, same thing, doesn't select the back. If I do it with the middle click, it will select everything that's in the view up to infinity. So sometimes it's pretty useful. And again, if you have nothing selected, it will apply whatever you're doing to everything. You don't have any selection right now, and if you select stuff, it will apply it to that selection. And just to reiterate, I'll delete all of this by using the middle mouse button so I can select everything. Just delete with delete key on the keyboard. Alright, let's look at this one a bit closer. So you have your item list here is the one that I 99% of the time I have it up. You don't really need too much when you're just modeling simple things like we're gonna do. So item list, this is the scene. It's your scene file. So if I save it, I'll just save. Better work. I'll just save it, just so you have that. So that's your actual file of the scene, and inside of that you have different things, so different items. So meshes with a little blue cube here are 3D objects that are in the scene, and then here you have a camera and a directional light. So yeah, okay, they're around here, so you can see them. So for example, if you're setting up your shot, then you can move your camera around and do your setup, and it will help you do that. And then here you can also just manually position it with numbers. So if you have an actual architectural scene that you want to show and you know the dimensions of it, it can help with that. Also here you have the all the parameters of the actual camera lens. So you have a focal length and angle of view, so you could change each of these two. They're the same thing basically. It's an inverted parameter, but they both if you change one, it will change the other. That's what I mean. So if you're more comfortable using a degree of the angle of view, you could use that. Or if you know, for example, that you have a certain camera lens that you kind of like, you can drop it here. So 2 centimeters is 20 millimeters, so 40 millimeter lens you'll put 4. If you're using a long lens, 100 millimeter, for example, you'll put 10 centimeters in the wall. And you can see a change here, and there's this little projection of the camera angle of view. So it can help, like, depending on what you want to do with your scene, right? The way you want to render it. Also, directional light, for example, you could add different types of lights, but this one is the basic one that comes with any scene that you start. And this is basically the sun. It's a directional light in the sense that even if I'll show you quickly. I'll go to render the mesh, so you can see the directional light, the position of it was on the top left and going down like this. So this is how it works here, but it's like the sun in the way that it's at infinity. So if you move it, even if you move it, I'll show you. I'll move it down behind the character this time. It will not change anything in the render because it's just showing a direction. If you want things that are a bit more like we might see, or like you might use in a set, let's just do an area light, for example. I'll move it around. Can I use the same? Oops. Same sort of angle as the other one. Go to render, see what happens. Same kind of thing. It's a softer light, obviously, because it's a bigger area light. And if I put it behind the character, nothing happens. Wait, it actually happens because I have an environment. Just get rid of them. I'll show you maybe a bit more of that later. How to, you can see it in real time moving around it. I'll get to render again, show you. Okay. That's pretty useful after when you want to do your lighting. You could change the intensity, change the color, and all that stuff. Okay, I'll show more now of the render tab, the render kind of workflow tab. And here you have this shading part that comes up. Well, you still have the same item list here. Yours might be a little bit different. I think in yours you'll have only the shading as a default, but you can always add more and make it your own. That's not a problem. So looking at the shading part, this is where anything render comes in. So you have the main like render node here, where you could choose the actual size of the frame. So if you want to do a render, let's say 4K render, you'll do 4000 by whatever, 3000. Oops. Let's say, yeah, and it will define this frame, and it will apply. That's in pixels, right? So when you do a render, it will apply that. So keep that in mind. If you want to change your render size, you go to render in the shading, in the render tab, shading, render, and then change it here. Also, these called outputs are the files that you'll get, the render passes that you will get when you do a render. So if you want the alpha, and I'll show you, it's available here in your effects. So you can choose which one of these you're looking at. So you can look at, for example, the alpha output, and this one is going to help you have selections, right? So if you want to select only the object that you rendered and then drop a photo behind it in Photoshop later, you can use the alpha. That's pretty useful, so you don't have to do manual selection. And then by default you have final color output, which is the final color render, normal thing, right? In here you have your materials. So in here, because I imported this one, this low resolution head from Modo, I have this material, but I'll just show you the base material. This is it, this one, and then here you have your properties. So you can change the color. Let's change that color, and then you have all the properties that will help you define what material this is. So if you want to do something very reflective, for example, like a clear plastic or some kind of metal or something, you could add some reflection. And I'll show you really quickly. I'll put an environment in, put an actual environment with some presets that you have in Modo, which are really cool. You have many different basic presets that you can use. So just use a random environment like this, just so you have a better sense of what's happening. So let's go back to the actual material. So you see I added a reflection amount of 5%. If I do 100%, you'll see 100% reflection here. We shall put a little bit less. Let's do 10, 12. All right, 12. And here you have the diffuse amount. So diffuse amount is going to be the amount of the diffuse channel, which is here, just the color. So if I put it 100%, I'll just get rid of the reflection so you can see better. Put it back at 80. That's the default. Specular. If I get rid of it, you get rid of the specular one, specular highlight here. By default set 20, then you can mess with that. There's the Fresnel effect that you can put in, which will, you know, the basic Fresnel effect, reflecting, but depending on the angle of view. Not too important. Now, roughness, really smooth material, or really matte material. If I put it at 90%, it will drive this specular amount, and also, oh, it doesn't drive the reflection actually. Yeah. So this roughness will drive the shape of the specular reflection that you have in your scene. So see, I put it lower, but if I make the roughness at 0, it's really smooth, and you'll see the specular highlight is really like sharp, and if you make it really matte, oops, not that, 80% roughness, so it's more like a matte material. Anyway, what else? So you can change the reflection like I just told you. Clear coat can be interesting also. It's just one of these options. It's just you have to play around with it and see what you like and see what works best. And I'll show you some tricks with materials if you want later. But then you can also change your materials. So at the end, when you're happy with your mesh, whatever, and you want to start rendering it, you could select same as before, polygons or edges or items as a whole, and then change the material that's attached to them. So I have one default material here in shading. I'll show you base material. So that's the default one, and it still has head. It shouldn't have because I deleted it, but whatever. I'll create a new one for the nose, and here you can already start changing some of the parameters. So quickly, usually you will just select the color so you can remember, and it will change the color only on these polygons. And the cool thing is that it also creates a little mask in here. So that's a group. It's kind of a little grouping mechanism, and it creates this new material yellow, and you're able to change its parameters just like before, and you can make multiple of these, and you can also use the default ones. I'll show you that quickly. Let's do some metal or whatever, bronze, and you can use these default ones and drag and drop them into your mask. So you made a mask for the nose that's only these polygons, and then whatever drops under here is going to be applied. So let's look at it. You have your bronze material, and you notice that you don't see the yellow one anymore because this one's on top, and the one's on top is always going to be the one that's rendered first. So if something is under it, and this is full, how can I explain that? A full color material, you won't see what's under it. If it's a transparent type material, let's show that. Let's see, I actually don't know. Let's do glass. I think there's only one that can be applied. I don't think it will. Yeah. Yeah, see here you can see inside the thing. So if you have one full material here, the one that's under it that we had in the beginning, you can just delete it. Doesn't serve any purpose anymore. But you can see already how you can start having a lot of fun with that. Like once you have a basic model, you can have really good physically based rendering that will help you then in your painting. It's already there, reflections and everything.